Hey, church family. Welcome to the FBC Durant Podcast. I'm Cole.
I'm Cory.
I'm Sarah.
I am substituting for Garrett today for the final episode of the podcast. Garrett couldn't be with us, but he'll be back for Season 2. And we're excited about Season 2 of the podcast, which we will be starting to release Season 2 episodes in August. So we're going to take the summer off from releasing episodes. And then we have some exciting things to continue to do on this show come August. And so to start us off today, I'm going to bring up some stuff that's going to go on here at FBC Durant throughout the summer that we won't be able to talk about because we won't be releasing episodes, but just for everyone to be mindful and be in prayer about the things we have going on this summer. We have Falls Creeks, we have our kids camp and our youth weeks at Falls Creek that are happening this summer. We have our mission trips. I think first our New York team is leaving the first week of June, which is very soon. And then we have some other various events on the summer calendar. And of course, just worship every Sunday, and we continue to have activities on Wednesday night, although things that normally happen, like the meal, are put on pause throughout the summer. But still a lot of exciting things happening in the life of the church to be a part of. And so we hope you be part of that. We are going to spend some time today reflecting on the first season of the podcast. And so I'm going to start us out with a question on that, and I'm going to ask you guys, what is your favorite episode from season 1 of the FBC Durant podcast?
Am I going first?
Yep.
I really don't know. That's a tough question because I feel like my answer would have changed every week. Probably my favorite episode was always the one we had just done, because I feel like I always kind of walked away learning a little bit more, even with our pastor series, or where we were just, doing all the different, men in our church that serve in like pastoral roles. I was just kind of learning a lot, especially kind of, like with Ken, we see him as the worship guy, but then we learned about more of the nuance of everything he does behind the scenes. But then obviously, Canda's episode, the Light of Mine episode, they were heavy episodes, really quiet, those episodes, because I think I just became the audience. In those episodes, I was just soaking in so much and just kind of like processing so much. So I would say those both really stand out heavy for me, and I really enjoyed being a part of those episodes.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
I was gone for a little bit of this season. So there's some that I missed out on during that time, but of the ones that I was here for, I kind of feel similar to Cory. I feel like it was just week to week basis. I learned a lot. I'm gonna say a couple for me. One was Canda's episode, obviously. I feel like I learned a lot. It was an encouraging episode while also being a very heavy topic. And I have said this before on the pod, but I don't want us to be scared to talk about heavy topics in our relationships and in church. So that one stands out to me. And then my other episode was with the McMillans, just because they have a special place in my heart, and I feel passionately about that missions partnership. And we did that recording at 6 a.m., which I don't love 6 a.m., but it was fun. It was fun to get to do that with everyone. That was my last episode before I went on maternity leave from the pod. So those are probably the two that I would say.
Yeah, sure. And I also just pretty much agree with everything you guys said. I'm also just being close to Ryan McMillan, very fond of that episode. And kind of like Cory said, the episodes we do most recently are kind of in my brain. And so the episode we just did with Didi Gallegos, I thought was one of the best episodes, honestly. I thought that was incredible. You guys mentioned Canda's episode, super impactful. And then I'll also just bring up the first 3 episodes we did on this podcast, which were the Discover FBC episodes. They were very foundational things regarding our church, and it's a lot of content that I've worked with Gary on the years in the church prior to actually recording them, and we've talked about kind of putting that content out in a way. We've done it in the book, but we found that doing it on the podcast was hopefully a really good way to just share things about the church and about our church and about church membership, and a lot of really good stuff in there from Gary. I like hearing him talk about some of those topics. It's not the kind of thing you might hear him say a lot, like at the pulpit on Sunday. It's the kind of thing you can get in a good conversation with him about in his office and things like that. But listening to him talk about it on a podcast was great, because we just kind of put it out there for everybody. And so if you want to know about our church, or if you haven't listened to those episodes, I would highly recommend go listening to those episodes we have on Discover FBC for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And just to kind of like bounce off of that, I think like, obviously this first season was a pretty big learning experience for us. I think when we first sat down to do the first episode, we had no idea what to expect. Moving forward, it's not like we had the whole year planned out. We just kind of had ideas. And there's a lot of obviously anxiety and nervousness, because you're like, what if this is stupid? Like what if everything we say just is like, or we turn on the mics and we don't have anything to say. And so like, yeah, like I think like it was cool to get to have Gary on, and Ken and Jim and Dustin and, and everybody, Sebastian, Guillermo, because I think, sometimes it's easy just to see guys in their position only on Sundays, only on Wednesdays, and then getting them in here, I hope, because I think for us, we're saying like, it was cool to hear more about that. It's cool to hear like, oh, Sebastian comes from this corporate past, Guillermo's time in Venezuela, and, like Ken's history and Jim's history and all this stuff. And like Gary, getting to kind of put his charisma out there. Like it's so fun, but I hope that's what the audience got to go like, oh man, I got to like kind of know the people in my church on like this deeper level, and so I think that's this really cool thing. But like, yeah, again, just, starting off so early with Candace's episode and having to tackle something like grief, but then getting to hear like God's working through that. I hope that was impactful to people. Getting to end with, Dee Dee and like just God's work and like this kind of overlooked need. And I think a lot of churches, I hope people had the same experience that, at least I can say I had just sitting on this couch, the past few months, hearing stories and, people in our church or people, even outside of it with the missions episodes and things like that. And then personally, like, I think there were episodes like with Ryan McMillan or Charles Lee, guys that were in the BCM when I was there, having a horrible time in the BCM when I was in college, and like getting to like kind of, because sometimes it's hard for me to like be in front of that past a little bit, or people that are associated with that kind of past a little bit, even though like not directly horrible to me or anything like that, but just to kind of get to like have a therapeutic like conversation where like, oh, everybody's grown up and like that's so gone and that's so in the past and all that stuff. And I think those were really cool moments for me as well. So I just think like I had just a really fun time doing the podcast on a very wide spectrum.
Yeah, I think learning, like you said, more about the people in our church and the people who are employed by our church and different things like that, but also just learning about all the stuff that's going on here. And to me, it's very clear that the Lord has done a lot here at the church that he continues to do, because there's so many different ministries that we've mentioned, so many moving hands, so many people volunteering their time. There's just people everywhere that are using the gifts that God gave them, and the different giftings that everyone has to just work as the body of Christ, which I think is so encouraging. And I think we know that. Like, I feel like that's like like that's what the church does. We're the body of Christ. We're all different pieces. But like, it felt like a very practical way to see that, like to see all the different pieces and to actually get to talk to someone and get different experiences, different walks of life, different ministries, and kind of get a fuller picture for myself of like the body of Christ, like actually working and the way that it works throughout.
Yeah, I think just like to end on that, it's just what I think we do with this podcast and like even the MVP videos that Cole makes and shows on Sundays is it puts a human element on a church that is, I think, necessary in churches. Sometimes they just don't have that human element. And I think it's just nice to go for a church to go out of its way to be like, here's people. There's all these different stories. There's all these different needs. There's all these different things being impacted. Some are great. Some are tragic, and it's just, but it puts that human element on a church. And I think that's been really fun to kind of get to witness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like what you said, too, when you were mentioning about meeting with our staff and just hearing about their stories. And in a church, we're not a huge church in terms of population, but even in just a church our size, sometimes it's hard for a church member or just a churchgoer to get personal time with our ministry staff because there's just so many people and everyone's so busy. But hopefully getting to listen to a podcast episode about these guys gets you get the ability to just hear from them in a way that you may not have before. And even more just our ministry staff that we've met on here. I hope that's the case with everybody that we meet with on the podcast, getting to hear from someone and just learn more about someone and the things that the Lord has done in their life is just a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And we've spent the first season meeting with several people, a lot of people, our ministry staff first and foremost, and we're going to continue to meet with people in season 2, and I guess I'll take this as an opportunity to kind of transition us into our Q&A portion. So if you missed our last episode was a live recording. We had a Q&A night here at the church, and that was part 1 of our season finale. This is part 2 of our season finale, but there were several questions during Q&A night that we didn't have the time to get to, and so we're going to get to the rest of them now. And I'll bring up the first one because there was a question about season 2, and it just said, what is next for the FBC Durant Podcast? And so I'll go ahead and answer that one just because I'm lining up some scheduling and stuff right now. Yeah, Cory may not know.
I was not knowing either.
What's happening? Season 2 is happening. We're going to continue doing this show and pick up releasing episodes, as I mentioned, in August. But we have a lineup of some good guests that we are planning to meet with in season 2 and continue to do some of the same stuff that we have already been doing. I appreciate everyone who filled out the form from Q&A night about giving some feedback to us and just giving us some ideas of things we can do in season 2. We're going to take those into account. We've already met and talked through those things, and we're going to attempt to do some of those things you guys mentioned in season 2 of the podcast, and continue to do some more stuff that we don't even know yet, but we do have plans for our first several episodes, and we'll see kind of what else comes to us as the season progresses. And so that's kind of where we're at on that. But I'll bring up our next question, and our next question is from Tony Scott, and it says, would you rather sloppy wet kiss or unforeseen kiss? Very important stuff here.
I know.
I don't understand the question. Like,
I know Cory's answer. It's wrong.
Like being performed on me? Like, that the way the question is
Hey,
kind of like worded is
Okay,
like,
yeah.
do I want a sloppy wet kiss or an
And for those who may not know, if you're listening to this, there's an old,
John Mark McMillan.
I don't call it old, 2000s, but it's a contemporary worship song written by a guy named John Mark McMillan who wrote a lyric where he used the phrase sloppy wet kiss to describe God's love, I guess, in a way, ultimately. But some people have chosen to not sing that lyric and sing unforeseen kiss instead.
David Crowder just said, I'm going to change your lyrics.
Notably David Crowder, who made the song very famous.
Yeah.
And so that's what Tony's referencing in this question. And it's kind of a hot topic in the Christian circle, specifically the Christian music circle, for the past 20 years. So that's what we're attempting to settle here.
Okay.
All right, Cory.
And I'm going to let Cory
I've
try
had
to
strong
handle this.
opinions about this, especially because, I've done worship music for over a decade now, and with Dustin, who leads worship for our contemporary services, and we were really active and out and playing all over the place in camps and different youth events when this song was huge. Mm-hmm. And so, and it was a thing. You would go to a church, you'd have it on the set list, and they would tell you what they want, and
Yeah.
you know, and it kind of became like, to me, I can be antagonistic and I can get really like hung up. I have ADHD. I can get hung up on really dumb stuff, and I would tell Dustin, if you do not sing the original lyric, I'm going to be mad, because I thought it was offensive to change somebody's lyric for a song, because I don't think Sloppy Wet was heretical. Or anything like that. It just sounds gross.
Oh, yeah.
It just sounds gross or whatever. And I think like I had so many conversations during that period of time with like youth pastors and stuff like that who would really hang up on like what you can do and say and stuff like that. And I heard everything from, well, it sounds pornographic. It sounds too lustful, in the context of God. Other people just said it sounded gross, and stuff like that. And I would always argue unforeseen sounded more heretical. It just sounded like, wait, so we didn't see Jesus coming? Because the whole Old Testament kind of like speaks to like Jesus coming. And so heaven meets earth like a unforeseen kiss felt weird to me even, but I really just was being antagonistic, I think, to be antagonistic back then. I prefer Sloppy Wet Kiss. And the best, defense I've ever heard was Dustin Searles. And he, one time, I know we were performing it, maybe at a camp, and he pauses at the bridge to explain the controversy. I mean, he just says, hey, we're going to sing this bridge, and we're going to sing Sloppy Wet. And at the time, he had had his first child, Luke, and Luke was a baby. And he said, to me, Sloppy Wet is the kind of kisses my son gives me. Aww. He said, a baby's kiss is so just gross. It's saliva spilled. It's kind of open mouth. It's just nasty. But he said, but it's the most loving kiss you'll ever experience. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was the best case for it. And I thought that was an amazing thing.
Yes.
And so, but it's a controversial lyric for.
Mine has nothing to do with anything as deep as Cory has described. I simply hate the word sloppy, period, for anything. Sloppy Joe, sloppy, just sloppy, just so that for that
it's
reason.
Just the word. All right.
But I concur with what you're saying. I understand and I hear you and I respect you because you have so much skin in the game of this Sloppy Wet Kiss war, but I just will not be singing it.
And I've heard that too. I've heard people say they just don't like that word. I've actually had said it's the word sloppy.
It's just a word, it's not the meaning.
And
to me,
and another word everyone hates is moist. A lot of people
moist
hate moist,
is fine.
and moist is a synonym for wet. That could have been Sloppy Moist Kiss, and it could have just been the worst lyric of all time.
You're right. I don't even hate the word moist, but it's worse.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking about it. Just think about it. He could have been worse. So, but no, I think worship people, leaders, bands, everybody kind of took a big sigh of relief when that song kind of died out of rotation a little bit, because you're like, all right, we're good.
No more Sloppy Wet controversy.
No.
Dustin, if and when you listen to this episode, leave us your 2 cents in the comment section.
Oh, by all means. I get it. Dustin was the most diplomatic guy in our band, always. And so he would do whatever he was asked by any camp leader, youth pastor. I was the one that was in Dustin's ear, you better do it. Dustin got to the end of that run with that song. He would step away from the mic. And he would let them sing whatever they wanted.
I get it. I would do the same thing.
Heaven meets earth and he just come back and do it. And it sucks because if grace is an ocean, then we're all sinking is one of the greatest lyrics I think ever written, and no one ever talks about it because heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss comes right before it.
I know. Yeah. So true. So true. Good song though. It really is a good song.
It is a good one.
Okay, so the next question is, what is a cherubim, and is it different than an angel?
Cherubim.
Gary? Oh, Gary's not here.
It's pronounced cherubim.
Okay,
cherubim?
That's on me.
Cherubim?
I mean, it's the
answer is yes, it is different than an angel.
Okay. Is it different than a seraphim?
Don't know.
Okay.
You would think.
I'll give a shot to answer this one.
Go for it, man.
So we see a cherubim in Genesis 3, A cherubim is different than an angel. They are both spiritual beings from the heavenly realms, I guess you could say. God sent a cherubim to the Garden of Eden after the fall. So when sin entered the world, God sent a cherubim to guard the tree of life, or the tree of life. And the cherubim is a very piercing figure, supposedly, to see. It's supposedly a combination of creatures, because God created the creatures, and the cherubim is representing kind of symbolically these creatures that God has created. And it can also, I think, appear in different forms at different times. And so it doesn't necessarily look the same every time you might see it, but supposedly that is what at least I think I know about the cherubim. And they're also, you can think of them as guards, while angels are messengers.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. It seems like angels, if we use that word in the Bible, they're coming to say something.
Yeah.
Whereas if we see the seraphim or cherubim in the Bible, it's usually they're around the throne of God, right? They're just in God's presence, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, if you see a cherubim, that you are entering the presence of God.
Okay.
While as an angel kind of comes to you, I guess, so to speak, and you're, but
interesting.
Yeah,
I've never thought about this. But
so would a cherub or a seraphim? That's the thing with 6 wings, right? Like some are down here, some are cover the eyes, and the others
and the verse, I think it's Genesis 3:24. There's a word about a flaming sword.
Yeah.
You can kind of read about that in the Bible, but pretty crazy stuff.
So with in Revelation, all the crazy creatures around the throne of God singing "Holy, Holy is God Almighty," would we consider that possibly them then? Because you say they're a mixture of.
Right. I don't think I can answer that on a whim right now.
No, that's fair.
That's
fair. We are not theologians.
We don't preach heresy here, but.
Yeah, I don't want to accidentally say something that's not true. I have to
Gary, hit us up in the comments.
My revelation knowledge.
What we said that was wrong.
Hopefully that was, I guess, somewhat correct to the person that asked that question.
I think that's good, especially differentiating. I think we see one as messengers, one is in the presence of God, almost like you said.
Right, that's
use
a good
the word
way.
guarding.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, I think. And so that's a good question. I like that question. Next question is from Sheridan Burns. It says, what's a moment in pop culture that you think exemplifies a biblical principle or gospel message? This is interesting because I do think there is quite a bit of stuff that goes on in the world that present gospel messages, even though they're not the gospel. And it kind of makes me think about how God may use people who may not be saved to share, I guess you could say, his word and speak to people still.
I just think it's interesting because I think it just proves God's existence even more, because I feel like we're all drawn, we're all just wired to be drawn to the idea of Star Wars, there's darkness and there's light and just stuff like that. I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting topic.
I'm proud of you brought up Star Wars.
It's a very Sheridan question. I would say, my opinion on it, because I'm one of those people that I will find the gospel narrative in almost anything. I think my theory after so long is, because you said, I think you can watch. I mean, obviously we all know Lord of the Rings, and it's kind of this very hodgepodge of different biblical messages and kind of things like that. And then Tolkien wrote that with the intention of it not being Christian,
right?
He said, I want to write something that I'm not going to make it. Pretty much, Tolkien would tell C.S. Lewis Narnia's garbage because it's too surface level. You're preaching to the crowd, and he said, I'm going to write something similar, or I'm writing something similar that I think the gospel will just come out on its own, because everything technically has the gospel in it. That's kind of his thing.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
I think that's what you're kind of getting at, is that you can watch Star Wars, and I think if you're really if you're a Christian, you read the Bible and stuff, you're going to find that stuff in it.
Yeah.
Because I think at this point we have to just say, okay, God's the creator, and all things created are created by God on some level. We can't take
Right.
credit for anything we make. And so no matter what we write, there's going to be some gospel message, I think, in it somewhere, no matter how deep you have to dig. Sometimes we crowbar it in there and it's real ugly and it's just obvious and gross. And sometimes it just comes out very beautifully. And so that's kind of how because I think you can watch any Marvel movie and
Yeah.
there's going to be some.
Yep, it's the hero. My favorite, the one right now is Dune. It's a Messiah
Dune is
figure.
a Messiah story. The Matrix is a Messiah
Exactly.
story.
There's so
Luke
many Messiah
Skywalker's the Messiah.
stories.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
it's all. There's Superman. Like they literally say
It's just
we
interwoven
base
into our
this off
culture
Jesus.
because I believe it's because Jesus is real, and
I think that's cool. I think that's a
worked in.
beautiful thing about art, and I think that's why also like I'm okay with like people engaging with secular art because it's like, well, yeah, but you can find some redeeming quality in it, most of the time, and so that's what I think that's I think that's just cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's really good.
I'm a big. Okay, I do not like movies half as much as Cory does. I'm a big pop culture.
I don't know that
Girly
that's true.
pop.
I just found out this year you watched the Oscars, and I've told Jube I'm watching the Oscars with Sarah and Cole from now
Yeah,
on.
let's
Yes.
schedule.
Because
Sweet.
nobody else watches them.
I will be there, or I will be square.
Because we were both upset, like the day after we
Devastating
recorded, we
news.
were like just mad at stuff, and like so. I was like, I'm watching with Sarah from now on.
So yeah, I just love the pop culture, like looking at like how like the gospel kind of affects pop culture without people really, like he said, there's some people who I don't feel like they really know,
Yeah.
but we're all made by God, so it's coming out.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure. And I think that's cool. I mean, like I think I tried to get a podcast in my last church saying like, let's just talk movies and what gospel message you can find in them.
Yes.
Because I think it's interesting. I think you can do it. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of love stories in movies, and anytime where someone cares about someone else more than they care about themselves,
Yeah.
it reminds me of Jesus.
Yeah.
it's true.
So
There you go.
Absolutely. No, that's a good question.
before we move on to the next question, can we talk about the Oscars for 60 seconds?
Yeah.
I'm glad that next year the people that vote on the Oscars are
Yes.
now required to watch the film they're voting on.
I know,
Which
I
you
saw-
would think would be required.
Somebody was like,
requirement.
that's just happening this year. I'm like,
I
yes.
read that article recently. It's like, wait, that wasn't a requirement? Like, they just watch a couple of the movies and they just said, I like that one a little bit more.
They're like,
I'm
I
not
think
watching
this
the
person
rest.
can act, so voted.
Yeah. I'm excited that stuntmen are
goes.
getting a category. That's going to be
Oh,
fun.
so
Yeah, that
fun.
is
That's
really cool.
because of, I guarantee that's because of that Ryan Gosling movie.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, probably.
What's that movie called? Why am I blanking on
I
it?
don't know. But he plays a
Hitman.
stuntman.
Gosling
No.
plays a stuntman
No.
with Emily Blunt.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I
can't
But
remember what it's
anyways,
called,
in
but-
that movie, he plays a stuntman, but at the end, they do like a long run of the actual stuntman doing all of his
Okay,
stunts.
yeah, that's cool.
And they like give them
All
all,
the
and the
props.
guy who wrote the movie was a stuntman.
That's
so,
cool.
Anyways, yay
And then,
stuntman!
Brad
Shout
Pitt
out.
won an Oscar like 5 years ago for playing a stuntman, and he said in a speech, stuntmen deserve an Oscar. So
Absolutely
this has
they
been
do.
This has been happening.
This is
for a
your
while.
moment,
This is
stuntman.
There's been a build up and
All right.
it's reached its peak.
So
Let's
the
go.
church is going to have an Oscar watch party
Yeah.
at Sarah's house. So.
Perfect.
This next question is from your wife, Cory.
Oh, okay.
Jabellis Williams says, have your views on any of the pillars changed since starting the podcast? And if so, what influenced that change?
Wow.
We've done so
question,
much
dude.
discussion on them. We may be thinking about them a little differently, or have a
Just for
worship,
people who are just
connection,
catching it.
discipleship, and mobilization are the pillars of our discipleship pathway here. Referencing the Discover FBC episodes here, if you want to know more about that. We talked about those a lot in those episodes. So
I think doing this podcast made me probably dive deeper into each pillar than I normally would have. And hopefully anyone that listened to all these episodes also maybe got exposed more to maybe one they've avoided, or and I think that's the thing. I think it both like exposes but also perpetuates the reality that we have different strengths. But sometimes like I would say, okay, I'm in the worship band, so worship's this big thing to me, and I completely think about it in a deep context a lot. And so much goes on behind the scenes rather than just practicing and playing. It's choosing songs, it's finding songs that go with what Gary's preaching, or anything like that. And so like there's all this thought and prayer that goes into worship behind playing instruments. But also, like, I would say, like, maybe I wouldn't have ever thought that much about mobilization because I didn't go on a lot of mission trips younger and kind of felt like, well, that's not my strength, blah, blah, blah. But it's great to get exposed to people who are. And, like, you know, just the fact that we have the McMillans raising their family overseas in Germany, which is a really difficult language to learn, and, like, but, like, to get exposed to that heart in someone that does that, and then, like, to take that and show it to the church and say, does anyone else feel this kind of calling? Maybe not to that level. Maybe you're not going to uproot your family and move to, but willing to go and support and love on Germans, and things like that. And so, or Colombians or people in New York or, in Tulsa and all over the place, But I think for me personally, and it has a lot to do with this podcast, but also just a lot to do with this church in particular, connection's been a big one. I've never had a huge church community. Always felt kind of out of place, black sheepish in every church until I think me and my wife, came here. And I think like I've gotten a better sense of connection and community since joining this church. And I think also this podcast has a lot to do with that as well, just getting to be exposed to so many people that maybe I wouldn't have talked to. I may not have ever run into Dee, Gallegos, I may never have run into Kanda, just even in church, because we go to a big enough church, you can hide in it if you wanted to, but like, and so I would say that like, my thoughts on the pillars have changed just in the sense that I think I have a deeper appreciation for all the different pillars now.
Yeah, connection is the one I like to bring up on this too, because at first glance, connection makes me, life groups, that's our MO of connection, but there's really a lot more to dissect about when it comes to connection. Mm-hmm. Like this podcast, what we're doing is trying to connect with people. We're trying to connect with people just in conversation in our daily lives. Like we want to get to know people, we want to know about people's lives and care for people on a deeper level, and that's all about connecting with them. And so, like, there's just a lot more under connection, and there's a lot of ministries in our church that fall under connection, like this one. Yeah. And a lot of what we do here in the media ministry with this podcast is about connecting. So.
Sure.
Yeah, I think y'all pretty much covered it all. I feel the same way. I feel like mostly what it is just a deeper dive into each pillar for me, like just learning more and feeling like I have like a richer understanding of what we have going on at this church in each pillar and the way that you can be a part, and just understanding that to like in a fuller way and through like other people's eyes in a way where, like I might not have I might have never gone to a certain mission trip, but someone's here talking about Tulsa and, Tiller's here talking about what he has going on. I haven't been there, but I can listen to the podcast and I can like know more about that. So I think just having a broader understanding, it's been very helpful.
Yeah. And like, again, I think like it does perpetuate the idea of like, I have a bigger strength in this pillar than maybe I do in the other ones. But I think getting exposed to those other ones just make you appreciate the people that have those strengths in the church. Like I'm blown away by Guillermo and Dustin and my wife and these people, like David Allen, a friend of mine who just randomly like signed up for Colombia and Germany, and just like, all right, cool, man. Like and that's just because we played videos at church that said, hey, we have these opportunities and you should go. And that was enough for him to go like, let's go see what that's about. And I think that that's really cool. And he's a very charismatic, social, cerebral guy that I'm like, he's going to be fantastic on this. I would suck if you dropped me off in Germany. I'm just not social in English, and so like I'm definitely not going to be social in another language, and I'm especially with such a heavy topic as sharing the gospel with people. And so like but I loved getting to be a part like of hearing the McMillans talk about that story, or Guillermo, or getting to hear like Danny and Tiller and just talk about we see them as mission trips. This is their lives, and like seeing that side of it is just and so cool. And then I hope maybe people who look at the worship one and go, well, that's not me because I don't play an instrument and I don't sing and things like that. Hopefully they heard things on this podcast that are just like, oh no, so worship's more than just this band or the choir. It's more than Ken and Dustin. It's this other thing, I mean, Dustin and I have always said, the congregation's the 6th, 7th member of the band. Like we're just whatever. Here's the music, sing with us, type of thing. And so I hope people just across the board that listen to these say like, oh cool, I never thought about this pillar. I haven't given much thought of on that level. Now that I've heard someone who's really passionate and strong in that has talked about it. And so, I think that was my experience across the board. It was so cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
next question. What would the world have been like if Eve never ate the fruit? The world was perfect at the time.
I guess perfection, man. That's really it, though.
What I think of, if Eve didn't eat the fruit, then the next person probably would have.
Yeah, at that point, it's
someone would have eaten the
philosophical.
fruit. Yeah.
Is it philosophical? It's like if Eve doesn't do it.
If a tree falls in the woods and makes a sound or whatever.
Does Cain eat it? Does Abel eat it? Let's just go down the line. Who eventually succumbs to it, so that's a fun question. All you can really go off of is speculation, but it's fun to think about. Oh, okay, if Eve doesn't fall, honestly, we don't have to go that far down the line. Adam probably would have just
exactly.
Just say, the snake moves on and says,
in your mind, it could have been perfect. Like the world could have been perfect, and sin could not have entered the world. But next person on down the line,
and you're getting into heavy theology at that point, because then is it the will of God that Eve ate the apple? I don't know.
Ooh, lots of heavy questions.
That's a heavy question, and that's your Calvinist versus your free will type of stuff of whose choice was it to eat the apple, God's or Eve's, and stuff like that. And the really, these kinds of questions are really fun, but you just kind of have to enter them as your final questions. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, unfortunately. But that was a great question.
I'm definitely not going to posture anything. It's here's the fact. Because it's I have no idea. It did happen, and because it happened, it led to Jesus, and so we're all thankful. So
yeah, absolutely.
So this next question is directed at Gary, who was on the panel with us during Q&A night. But I'm going to go ahead and bring it up.
Oh, we get to answer for Gary. This is fun.
Yeah, answer for Gary. What has been challenging and encouraging about going through Romans with our church? And I know just from my personal conversations I've had with Gary, I think one thing he would bring up as far as the challenging part goes would be some of that Romans 5 stuff about just the doctrine of sin and the messages that he preached on that, just because that's some of the more grittier stuff that there is in the New Testament. And it's very interesting and I guess challenging in a way. And I'm sure he would say something around that.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? We could speak on the encouraging stuff, at least for Romans, but also this would be a good opportunity to reference our episodes we did on Romans with Gary, who kind of shared what we were going through in Romans during that time. And so you could hear some of his thoughts during those episodes if you look back on those Romans recordings we did.
And we ended right at starting 6, right? Or we were barely into 6.
Right. Yes, I believe so.
Taking this break with...
Right.
This
Correct.
We Are Family series that we're doing. I'm encouraged just having a pastor that doesn't dodge the hard stuff. I've been in... I wouldn't say been in churches, but I have been in situations where I've seen someone skip over a section or skip over a line because it's hard. It is controversial or whatever, and I always commend that Gary will hit some of these really tough parts and be, I think, faithful in backing what the Bible says, but also I think Gary does a good due diligence in also telling us not to be stupid with some of this controversial stuff, which I always appreciate because we're really capable of that. I look forward to us getting to Romans 8, where he is going to have to talk about words like predestination, and half of a congregation might be Calvinist and be like, well, yeah, and the other half might be non-Calvinist and be like, well, let's slow down, but he's going to do it. He's going to do it well, and I look forward to that. I think that's cool, and so
for sure.
Absolutely.
So that's what's encouraging to me is know that Gary's not going to skip something that's hard.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You have anything on that?
Nope.
Yeah, I think it's good. How's the podcast changed your mind in a good way? That's what this question says.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of go back to the same the question that you've asked because like I think a lot of things I just didn't know or wasn't aware of, or just hearing people's stories. I think because of that, like I have a lot more perspective into what the Lord has going on here at this church and with the people who are here. And so for that reason, I feel like I think a little bit differently than I did when we started the pod. I feel like the Lord's used it to grow and encourage me in different ways, and just enlighten me on some of the, gifts and things that other people have in this church. And it's been very encouraging. So that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's just given me like a wider perspective of the people in our church, even just having a small sample size of one season of having them on there, like, which in a very encouraging way. I feel like our church is just, there's a lot of churches where like it would be really hard for certain people to walk into, and I just don't think there's anyone in the world that could walk into this church and be met with any sort of hostility or judgment. I just feel like we're a loving church.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard, or even if like you have to say hard things or take certain stances, I just feel like the people in this church are very loving, and I just, that continues to like be perpetuated like the more I meet people and get to talk to people and like and stuff like that. So
yeah.
And so I mean, like, one of the biggest things I tell people, because I play bass and on our worship team, and I'm very mobile on stage, and I played with Dustin for a long time, and one of the biggest things that I noticed first at this church was some of my biggest fans in this church are the older people. Who in the past, we've been at other churches, are the people like, you should never move on stage. That is absolutely insulting to God. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, and stuff like that. And so I just feel like this church is just full of like love, acceptance, meeting people where they're at, accepting people where they're at all the time. And this is just me personally, just because I've had a lot of bad experiences in church. And this church is just like continues to amaze me how like cool people are.
Yeah, I agree.
So
for sure. This might would be a good time to bring up the next question, which says, Cory, why you move that way when you're playing the guitar?
Someone asked that? Is it
guitar!
anonymous?
It's an anonymous question.
Oh, okay.
A little bit.
He likes to catch a vibe.
I don't know. I don't have a good I don't have a good answer. I was in punk rock bands and stuff before I ever did worship, and I was very much I'm going to give you your money's worth. If you come to a show, I would jump off things, do all sorts of stuff. And so I think I've always been active. When it came time though, it's like I got to a point where I was getting burnt out doing punk rock and all that type of stuff, and just the travel, and like I just wasn't enjoying it. I was getting to certain like places in certain bands where all of a sudden people are putting pieces of paper in front of you to sign. Do you want to get paid to do this? And I kind of got to a point where I was like, no, I don't. Yeah. I actually don't love this. I actually don't like this. I don't know why I ever picked up an instrument. I don't consider myself a musician. I consider myself someone who knows how to do something. And so when I started playing with Dustin, though, I think I started appreciating music a lot more because it was worship. All of a sudden, it was like the spotlight's off of me as putting on something else, and I really got a lot of joy out of that. And so I think I've just picked up, or I've carried some of that whole like maybe the punk rock stuff into just being moved. That's just how I learned to play bass. Yeah. I was moving. Also, I was in marching band in high school, and you have to move and play. And so maybe that's just what it is. In marching band, you're keeping time with your feet, because you're marching in time. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it as well. But I've always gone back to the footloose quote, as I like to call it, which is like 2 Samuel 6:14, and David danced before the Lord with all his might. That is what I've just learned to hit people with that. If I am in a situation where someone doesn't like it, or they kind of ask like, well, aren't you being a little like Elvis Presley up there? And I'm like, I'm not meaning to be, but like sometimes you get an older crowd and they just don't love it. And so, but I'll remind them that verse is there, and that I was like, I think we're meant to worship with all of us, and that's nothing against the people that don't move, because playing music's hard, and I play bass, and bass is probably the easiest instrument on that stage. And so, but that's just how I worship, I think. I'm doing stuff with my hands. Can't raise my hands. can't do stuff. And so I think for me, it's how I keep time. It's just a habit. And if you see me play drums, I will probably twirl a stick, and people have asked me about that. And that is just absolutely habit. That's just something you're doing while this hand's not doing something. And so it's really not much. Like, I'm not trying to be flashy. I can tell you that, because Dustin will tell you I have wrestled with how much I move. I have told Dustin, it's like, I am convicted. I think I am horrible for this. I think I just distract people, and Dustin has walked me through it and been like, no, people need this. Yeah. You know, people need to see someone enjoying it and moving it at times, you know, and so. For sure. So I stick with it, and I've gotten over it. Yeah. So.
Well, I think the person that asked the question, for the record, was lighthearted about it, because they included a fun emoji.
No, and I believe that they were probably just being fun and stuff like that. At least they didn't ask me why my guitars are pink. I get that one a lot too. So
I like the pink guitar.
Yeah, thank you.
I've never even noticed it's pink.
It's pink.
Noticed now.
It's very good. It's the same color as your cup, pretty much.
Love it.
So
this next question says, what is your sense of where the Lord is leading us as we enter into the summer months and the fall?
As a church?
This would have been a Gary question.
I think as a church, and I guess I'll answer that since I'm in staff meetings and stuff like that. Well, I can say that we'll always stay true to our mission and vision, which we talk about a lot on here. Glorify God, make disciples of all nations, and we'll do that through our discipleship pathway of moving people through worship, connection, discipleship, and mobilization. It always is a challenge. One thing Gary mentioned on Q&A night is just kind of some of the challenges that come with the connection point, and maybe moving from worship to connection might be the hardest thing for people to do sometimes, and always trying to overcome that barrier and providing ways for people to easily overcome that. And I guess I'll just say that as a word to, if you are a church member here, or you're in our Sunday morning worship, and you do see someone who is new or someone you don't recognize, just be encouraging and soft-hearted to people like that, and just be approachable to them, and maybe even approach them, just because starting a conversation with someone on a Sunday morning could mean a lot for them. And unfortunately, at times, just the way nature of things falls, sometimes you might have people who make their way into worship on Sundays but don't necessarily feel connection with anybody or anything going on, and then they may drop out, and so working hard to avoid that and do what we can to just share God's love with people is always something. And that was kind of a little bit of a rabbit trail and connection from our pillars, but I mentioned like all of the events and things that are going on throughout the summer. These are all things that we have that happen mostly annually every year that we do here to further God's kingdom, build His kingdom, and those are going to be happening. And come fall is kind of the season where us staff guys will do a retreat, and we'll really get into like the nitty gritty of stuff like this, and talk about the hard things, and talk about things that we could do better, things we need to do, or just spitball ideas and dream about things. And those are always things that are happening here at the church for us. But I can say that I think a lot of really good things are in FBC Durant's future. Don't you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're in a season of growth, and I think the church, and Gary in particular, is really approaching it with a very healthy mindset, because I think growth can be dangerous to a church if you approach it with an unhealthy mindset. Gary was talking even this last Sunday, I think, and he was talking about when he was a youth pastor, he was an idiot, and he would compare his like youth size with his friend's youth size. And I did youth ministry for a while, and you would see that sometimes. You'd be at a camp, and you'd have like youth pastors kind of bragging about the size of their youth groups. I think churches can do that. We can go, oh, we're growing, and then all of a sudden, instead of like what I think our church is doing is like, cool, how do we grow healthy? Yeah. Like, how do we make space, and how do we like, and like, it's almost like, I know it was hard to do two services, because you're like, you don't want to have two congregations, or to do you don't want your contemporary service to be two congregations, because you already had like a classical congregation and a traditional congregation. You want to like have those conversations that are like, we don't want the church to feel like three different churches from three different services. And like, I think Gary's really good about that. I think like going, hey, we're growing, which is good. How do we grow as a church and keep community important and keep the worship important and the mobilization and these pillars important in that, instead of going, hey, we have momentum, what gimmick can we do to bring even more people in? Because I think that's the danger sometimes.
Yeah, keeping connection and discipleship and like really central. I feel like that's been encouraging, because it's not just like growth as in people, it's like deep growth together. So like I feel like we're growing in a way that's like towards Christ too, and not just in numbers. And I foresee that continuing, because our leadership, our staff is very passionate about, growing, like you said, growing healthily and figuring out how can we do it in a way that's God honoring. So that's encouraging to me.
Yeah, for sure. That's well said.
Yeah. And I think kind of wrap that up, just to do kind of keep doing what we've been doing and do it well as we can and press on,
Yeah, for sure.
Are you able to share the gospel with someone through a podcast session? You are able.
And they're asking if they want to come on and do that?
I don't know.
Or are we able to do that?
I don't know. I think we could take it either way. It says, are you able to share the gospel with someone through a podcast session?
I mean, yeah, I don't know why not.
Yeah.
I think the gospel's been shared on this podcast.
Oh, I think time and time again
So
it has.
I would say yes. The answer is yes.
For
definitely.
sure.
And we've had plenty of testimonies of people about how they received the gospel,
Yeah, I think the gospel's been shared over and over and over again on this podcast through testimonies, specifically, and in what God's doing through missions, through this church, and through people's personal stories and things like that. But, if you wanted to simplify this down, you can absolutely do an episode where you say, all right, let's do the gospel. Mm-hmm. Let's go through, how do we teach the Bible in 30 minutes, and and the gospel of it. Yeah, we could. Maybe it's something to think about. Maybe it's something to say, hey, Gary, can you give us 30 minutes from Genesis to Revelation and simplify it down?
For sure.
But then again, I would just point people to things like the Bible Project that already exists and do it super well. Yeah. So,
yeah, Bible Project. That's a good reference. YouTube channel, Bible Project. In case you don't know, you can learn a lot of really good stuff on there.
Yeah, for sure. So, but yeah, don't see why not.
Next question is from JD Muse. JD says, "What is the biggest impact you have seen in season 1 on church members and non-church members?" I will say it's a little bit difficult to gauge the impact fully to an extent, because we do these recordings and we put them out, and then sometimes we don't know how. I can see the analytics and the numbers and stuff like that, but I think the feedback we've gotten from the people that have listened has been great. It was helpful to see the people that filled out the form I had for Q&A night, and I was glad to see all the people that have listened to episodes, and maybe more importantly, shared the episodes. The people that said they've shared the episodes with other people. I was really happy to see a lot of people said they've done that.
I think you can only speculate on non-church members. I've seen a little bit. I would say that those first 3 episodes are a resource that constantly gets shared with non-church members. If someone asks, hey, what's your church about? You say, cool. Actually, if you got some time, our pastor did 3 episodes on what our church stands for, the history of the church, what we're about.
Yeah.
And so I know that those have been shared with people. And I would say that, I guarantee you that there's impact happening outside of the church through this podcast. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw more churches start podcasts, because I think that's just the typical way of doing things. Someone does something, and then others say, well, why can't we do that? Because I think it would be beneficial. You could literally, it's a good resource for anyone. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be shocked if you had people reach out and say, what do we need to do this to be an information and thing to our congregation and membership, And I think every church has its own fun little identity. And so I would love to see other churches do podcasts and hear what's going on in their world. And then, I don't know, I hope other churches also heard things like Didi Gallegos and saying, hey, we should have special needs ministry.
Yeah.
We should, sure. Or hey, we should have something kind of like those life groups. We should have, and then if they do start podcasts, we might hear something and go, hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I think that there's probably impact happening that we may not see or know about, but my assumption would be it's there.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, I'd agree with
on
that.
some level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and again, I hope, I can't imagine that someone who doesn't go to church or did not hear Candace's episode only because they know her story, they wanted to hear her speak and not absolutely be like completely moved and inspired on how to like walk through grief, because everybody walks through grief, even maybe not on that level, but everyone will walk through it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so like I think it's stuff like that probably happens and we just don't get to hear about it or know about it.
For sure.
So
For sure. Well, that was the last question we have to finish out the Q&A that we got in. Do you guys have anything else
I don't think
to
so.
say on it?
No, I think it was a fun season. So,
It was.
and I hope next year we'll work out kinks, do things different, and the same. You know, I just think we'll get to I think we're going to find footing next season. That'll be a lot of fun. I look forward to talking to other people in our church, and even like maybe we'll have the opportunity to just bring members on and get things or outside guests, or, you know, I mean, like, I don't know. I'm looking forward to next season now that this one's over. I think it'll be cool.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Definitely.
And I think we've all agreed to come back.
We've all agreed to
Unless
come back.
we're
We're in.
firing Garrett because he's not here. So,
Garrett missed the finale, part 2 of the finale,
Sorry.
but he has told me he's back. So
cool. Awesome. Great.
Well, we've put together just some highlights of moments throughout the season to listen to now. So enjoy those, and we'll see you next time.
The church is a group of Christians who regularly gather together in Christ's name to affirm and oversee each other's membership in Christ and their discipleship through gospel preaching and gospel ordinances.
If you don't hear anything today about discipleship J groups more specifically, something you said that should impact anybody that can hear this. As I was going through some stuff, but thankfully I was in a J group.
Mm-hmm.
Like, thankfully during that part of my life, I had those people essentially, not just like the term J group.
Yeah.
But I was doing that. I was committed to that because I think I've spent a lot of my Christian life kind of wondering from the time I was young. Even, you know, there's days I feel this way, but like in regards to Christianity, like, am I doing it? Am I being a Christian?
Yeah.
I've never had that thought in J group. Like, you're doing it.
Yeah, you are.
You know, you're doing it. You're being obedient to the scripture and what God calls us to.
We together are to affirm and oversee each other's membership in the kingdom of God. We do that together.
I feel like during that time, the local church was just really key to helping me through all of those different life stage adjustments that I was going through, because I feel like it's kind of easy to get lost a little bit after you graduate college. I know that I've talked to several people who have done this, just like because you kind of feel like you lose community a little bit, if that makes sense. Like, all your friends spread out, like, you know, people move away, and you just kind of like feel lost a little bit. And I feel like the local church was so important.
The purpose is to encourage all of us to seek the cross. The purpose is to encourage all of us to finish the race, because we're all going to face trials. Like, I may have lost Bowman, but honestly, like, who knows what's in my future? And I mean, we're all going to come across something that's challenging, and we're going to have faith to get through it, or we need the faith to get through it. And then the Finish Your Race, the title of the book is that. So when we were picking out, weirdly enough, t-shirts for the service, someone said, what do you want it to say? And Sean instantly said, finish your race. And the person was like, you mean finished his race? Like past tense, like Bowman? And he's like, no, finish your race. This is a call to action. Like, this isn't necessarily about Bowman, it's about us. Like, it's about grief and like us getting through this. We're gonna press on to finish our race now.
Everything we do needs to be around providing one of three opportunities. The first is a chance or the opportunity for the students to know Christ. So that's sharing the gospel. The second is the opportunity for them to grow with Christ. That's the discipleship part. And the third is a chance for them to share Christ. That's helping to teach them how to share the gospel and then give them the chances to go and do it. Outside of that, there shouldn't be anything else that we need to be adding or trying to do.
FBC Durant it's provided a very safe place for me. Because again, I'm an introvert. I don't go seek out a lot of like events or large crowds in community, necessarily in like Christian community or church events and things like that. I don't seek it out. I have a wife that pushes me. But I think the best thing I can say about FBC Durant right now in this church and what it's doing for me is it's not going to let me be stupid. There's going to be challenge there, but it's a very safe place to be human, and like kind of be like, I know that I'm always going to meet love though. That the FBC hasn't crafted its own brand of like, here's what the Christian looks like. It's more or less FBC Durant said, we're all human, we're all going to fall, and we're going to be there to pick each other up. Where I've come out of ministries where it felt like, oh, you need to fit this suit of armor we've built. We think this is a Christian. I'm like, well, I don't fit in this, and then you're just uncomfortable and you're like, I hate this, and you feel like you're under a microscope of fundamentalism and things like that. You're like, and I can't live up to that. And so I think that like you just talking the word, it's safe here. It just feels like a very, very safe community that you're just always in love, but you're always going to be challenged. That's what I want to say.
Since we started being real intentional about discipleship, I don't think you can compare the overall spiritual health of the church now to 4 or 5 years ago before we got messy in discipleship. I think there's a higher biblical literacy. I think there's a higher sensitivity to the Spirit. And I think there's a higher value based on community. And it happens because we've all been interacting more intentionally with the Lord.
I think one of the big differences maybe is just the word intentionality. Everywhere we go, we're trying to be intentional. We're not just going to our kids' sporting events, right? We're going, and as our kids play sports, we're trying to interact with parents and invite them over for dinner. We're trying to go and pray and just see who God might lead us to. Like, we're doing normal things. We're going to the group. Like, everything we do is normal, but our eyes are constantly open to the people around us.
We don't know what the need is. We don't know what their circumstances are. So we want to always deal with people with care, compassion, and concern.
My one challenge or piece of advice would be to allow the gospel to be so rooted in your life that it actually changes the way you live and what you do, with your life. That it's not just going to church on a Sunday, and it's not just giving your tithes and offerings, but put your life on the table and say, oh God, what do you want to do with my life? Whatever time however old you are, whether you're retired or you're a college student or a high school student, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Putting your life on the table and say, okay, God, what do you have for me?
I've had some tremendous worship experiences sitting in a deer blind, watching the sun come up, or being on the side of a mountain in Colorado, or on the Sea of Galilee a couple of different times. Not singing a note, just taking it in and watching God's creation, and that's worship.
I would encourage people, like, if you just step out a little bit, if you step out a little bit, you will get, like you said, like, carried away with it and just be able to be poured in. It is good. It's all scary. It is scary, but it's good.
It is,
yeah. Honestly, discipleship, you just look at the root word disciple, right? And so who were the disciples? They were people who followed Jesus. They spent time with him, and in spending time with Jesus, they learned. They saw his example, and through his example, they learned what it meant to be Christ-like and how to share the love of God with other people and how to change the lives of people through sharing God's love with them.
We want to, I think, see them grow to the point that we talked about mobilization, that when they leave college, like
they're mobilizing their lives for the gospel in whatever aspect that is, whether that's becoming career missionaries or whether that's becoming a football coach who knows that his most important job is not football, right? But is making Jesus known.
When I say the true gospel is say, okay, you need Jesus in your life. You need a Savior in your life. You are separated from Him for your sins. You need a Savior in your life. So it's the gospel.
When you tap into your creativity is, I think, when you reach your full potential. And as a Christ follower, when you tap into your creativity is when you really produce some of the most beautiful stuff.
But I have my own little part of Sundays that I get to be a part of. It's a cool picture of the church at large, right? Like with all our different gifts, being members of the body, being the foot, being the hand, all the things that make our church function on a Sunday is what makes the church go.
Oh, for sure.
Monday through Saturday. It's cool. It's a cool picture.
The man ministry is really an opportunity to have these guys come together that have previously really been separated by services and also lifestyle, right? I mean, if we don't work in the same place or we don't have kind of the same general interest, I'm probably not going to bump into you out and about. And so the man ministry is this place where we can come together, not separated by service time, not separated by lifestyle or anything, and just worship Jesus together.
Well, I think part of it goes back to, younger women want to learn from older women.
That's a good answer.
And same for men. And so, especially for people who maybe don't have that in their family or their family's not nearby. And so, yeah, exactly.
They're our greatest teachers, and any parent of a special needs child, or I think any parent at all, we learn from our kids, right? We learn to be a better person, be more patient, don't take life for granted. My son was very ill most of his life, very sick, and he has epilepsy as well. And so we've been in dark times, and our faith is the only thing that's really gotten us through that.
God is young, yeah, God is young. Maybe we're the one to grow old.
Thank you for joining us this season on the FBC Durant Podcast. If you like the show, we encourage everyone to subscribe to the FBC Durant YouTube channel where you can watch us. And if you turn on your notification bell, you'll be notified when we release new episodes. You can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and all the other major podcast platforms. Follow us on your preferred platform and feel free to leave us a review. If you know someone who would enjoy the podcast, please share it with them. We love hearing from people about how they've engaged with the show. This podcast exists to help everyone become equipped, encouraged, and ultimately engage with the Lord and our church's mission. To learn more, you can visit fbcdurant.org, which is linked in the show notes. You can also follow FBC Durant on social media to further connect with the church online. FBC Durant worships every Sunday at 8:30 a.m., 10 a.m., and 11:15 a.m. at 124 West Evergreen Street in Durant, Oklahoma. You can also join the live stream every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. We exist to glorify God by making disciples of all nations. We long to see every person progress along the path to spiritual maturity through worship, connection, discipleship, and mobilization. Please contact us if you have any questions or want to know more about the church. I want to say thank you to our podcast host, Garrett Scott, Cory Williams, Sarah Hughes. The podcast is produced by myself, Cole Hughes, as I serve as the creative media and IT director at FBC Durant. I also want to thank all of our guests we've had this season: Gary McNeil, Kanda Forbes, Sebastian Connor, Ryan McMillan, Tiller Watson, Danny Torres, Ken Bartholomew, Esme Garcia, Jim Hodson, Dustin Searles, Guillermo Garcia, Charles Lee, Catherine Rhines, and Dee Dee Gallegos. Also, a special thank you to John Mark McMillan for our podcast theme song, God is Young, from the album Peopled with Dreams, provided by MusicBed. That wraps up Season 1 of the FBC Durant Podcast. Until next time, go and make disciples of all nations.